Melissa Gilbert has finally revealed what fans never figured out about Little House on the Prairie, and the truth has sent a jolt through the millions who grew up watching her. For decades, she carried the image of America's half-pint, but the story behind that role was far more complicated than the gentle world the show portrayed. What she is sharing now reshapes everything people believed about her childhood on that set. It is a truth she held onto quietly, while the series became a national treasure, a truth even the most devoted fans never saw coming. Now, as the show reaches its 50th year, Melissa is finally ready to explain what really happened and why she kept it hidden for so long. Melissa Gilbert often says her childhood shifted in a single moment, not on a soundstage or in a casting office, but in the middle of an ordinary school day. The girl millions would one day recognize as Laura Ingalls Wilder was only 9 years old in 1974, doing what every child does, running between classes, thinking about homework, thinking about lunch. She had already auditioned for Little House on the Prairie, arriving in simple overalls and flannel, even leaving a little dirt on her face to look as authentic as she could. She hoped for the role, of course, but Hollywood rarely hands life-changing news to a child in a way she expects. What happened next stayed with her for 50 years. She was standing in the schoolyard when another girl approached her. Melissa did not recognize her immediately. Not in that setting, not without cameras or crews around. But this was Leslie Landon, daughter of Michael Landon, the man who would star in and guide Little House on the Prairie. Leslie did not walk over with ceremony or excitement. She simply delivered the words as if passing along a casual message between classmates. Her father, she said, wanted Melissa to know she would be playing half-pint. That was how Melissa learned she had become Laura Ingalls. No agent call, no congratulatory meeting, no official announcement, just a quiet sentence in a noisy schoolyard. The simplicity of that moment surprised her so deeply that she decided to confirm it, the only way a 9-year-old could. She ran to a payphone later that day and called her family and her agents, telling them what she had been told. They were hearing the news for the first time. Nothing in her life had changed yet. Not outwardly, not immediately. She still had homework waiting at home. She still had to finish the school day. But inside, everything shifted. The girl who had walked into school that morning as Melissa Gilbert was going home as the future Laura Ingalls Wilder. Fans never realized how unusual this beginning truly was. In an industry filled with contracts, negotiations, and layers of communication, Melissa's fate unfolded through a simple conversation between two children. That origin shaped the way she viewed the role for years to come. It did not feel like a polished Hollywood decision. It felt personal. It felt intimate. It felt like she had been chosen not by a system, but by a family. Michael Landon was already a towering figure in American television by then, but to Melissa, this moment defined him in another way. Before she even stepped on set, before the cameras rolled, his family spoke the first words that would connect them. When Little House on the Prairie premiered later that same year, audiences saw only the final product, the warm homestead, the braided hair, the cheerful girl running across wide frontier fields. No one imagined the unexpected path that had led her there. No one imagined a casting story delivered not with fanfare, but with a schoolyard whisper. What television viewers embraced as destiny had begun as a message that could have easily been lost in the noise of children moving through a hallway. That is why this revelation matters now. It explains the foundation of Melissa's bond with the series, why she has carried it so closely for so long. It did not arrive with the structure of a career move. It arrived with the spontaneity of childhood. And because of that, it embedded itself not just in her memory, but in her sense of identity. Yet this moment was only the beginning. What came after reshaped her life in ways she could not yet understand. And the world she entered would soon ask far more of her than any 9-year-old could anticipate. Stepping onto the set of Little House on the Prairie should have felt like entering another century, but for Melissa Gilbert it became something far more complicated. Audiences saw a world filled with lantern light, hand-sewn dresses, and gentle frontier lessons. Yet behind that calm vision stood a 9-year-old girl learning how to carry the weight of a full-time career. What fans never fully realized was the contrast between the childhood she acted and the childhood she lived. Laura Ingalls Wilder belonged to a simpler world, untouched by the pressures of fame. Melissa, meanwhile, was navigating scripts, schoolwork, and expectations that grew heavier with every season. Her parents worked fiercely to protect her from the parts of fame no child is prepared to confront. The show made her beloved across America, but some of the fan mail she received was unsettling, even frightening. Letters arrived from prisons, from strangers who felt they knew her, from people who fixated on her innocence because they saw it reflected through the character she played. Her parents intercepted most of it, shielding her from the darker side of visibility. They wanted her to feel safe, and more importantly, to stay grounded. At home, she still had chores. She still had household responsibilities. Nothing in her family life allowed her to believe she had become someone extraordinary. Her parents understood that the world adored Laura Ingalls, but they refused to let Melissa grow up believing she lived inside that adoration. Fame was something outside their front door, not inside it. This balance, this tension between national recognition and an ordinary home life, created a split in her childhood that only became more pronounced as the show grew in popularity. Even on set, the illusion carried its own challenges. Period authenticity mattered to every frame of the show. Melissa's braces, a perfectly normal part of growing up, had no place in the 19th century. The makeup department worked around it with ingenuity, applying candle wax to disguise the metal. Viewers saw a frontier girl with a bright smile. They never saw the careful effort behind that smile, the quiet discomfort, or the way a child learned to adapt her real life to the needs of a character who never aged exactly the way she did. Balancing school with filming created another layer of pressure. The other children at her school experienced a world without cameras, but Melissa moved back and forth between two realities. On set, she carried emotional scenes that demanded maturity far beyond her years. At school, she faced the normal insecurities of childhood. That duality, so rarely spoken about, shaped her sense of self long before she understood what it meant. Yet, despite the demands, something extraordinary happened. The set became a second home, and the cast a second family. She was surrounded by adults who brought history to life, who treated her with kindness, and who gave her stability during long filming days. But the truth remained. She was still a child inside a world built by grown-ups, learning to move through pressures she never asked for. Fans saw a carefree girl racing across fields, not the young actress juggling the responsibilities that came with embodying an American icon. This contrast became the defining thread of her early life. Melissa lived two childhoods at once, and only now does she speak about how deeply that shaped her. Audiences embraced Laura Ingalls for her innocence, but Melissa earned that innocence through balance, resilience, and a discipline few children could ever imagine. And as the seasons passed, the questions surrounding who she was becoming, both on screen and off, grew harder to ignore. By the time Melissa Gilbert arrived on the set of Little House on the Prairie, Michael Landon was already a towering presence in American television. Audiences knew him from Bonanza, admired his storytelling, and trusted the emotional world he created. For Melissa, however, his influence began long before she understood his legacy. It began the day his daughter Leslie approached her in that schoolyard and quietly delivered the news that would change her life. That simple message, spoken without ceremony, became Melissa's first connection to him, long before he became the guiding force of her early career. When she met him on set, she encountered not just an actor, but the executive producer who shaped the tone, visual style, and emotional core of the series. Michael Landon carried a level of responsibility few children could comprehend. He wrote, produced, directed, and starred, and each decision he made influenced the environment Melissa stepped into. She watched him manage long shooting days, keep the cast focused, and maintain the show's vision. To her he was both leader and anchor, someone who set the rhythm of the world she had entered. His presence shaped how she understood professional expectations. Melissa was still a child, learning lines, balancing schoolwork, and discovering what it meant to be part of a massive production. She looked to the adults around her for cues, and Landon's intensity and commitment stood at the center of that early education. The way he moved through a set, the way he framed scenes, the way he communicated with cast and crew created a model Melissa learned from simply by watching. She grew into her role under his direction, adapting to the demands he placed on every performer, regardless of age. What viewers saw on screen reflected a relationship built on that structure. Pa and Laura shared an emotional bond that carried the show's heart. Behind the scenes, Landon's leadership helped Melissa navigate the pressures she was facing. The show demanded authenticity, consistency, and emotional clarity from all of its actors, and Melissa delivered because she understood the expectations set from the very top. She learned that every detail mattered, every expression mattered, every moment on camera contributed to a story bigger than any one person. As the seasons passed, Melissa gained a deeper awareness of how much work Landon carried. Long days, creative decisions, and the responsibility of keeping a nationally beloved series running weighed heavily on him. She saw the effort behind each episode, the energy required to lead a cast that ranged from veteran performers to children just discovering their craft. Though she could not fully grasp the scope of his job at the time, those early impressions shaped her understanding of professionalism long after the series ended. For fans, Michael Landon and Melissa Gilbert will always be remembered as Pa and Half Pint, two figures whose bond defined the emotional pulse of the show. Off-screen, their connection was rooted in structure, expectation, and the rhythm of a production that demanded more from a child actor than audiences realized. Melissa grew up under his direction, and that experience formed the foundation of her approach to storytelling in the decades that followed. His influence shaped her work long before she understood its weight, and when the series closed in 1983, Melissa stepped into a world no longer defined by Michael Landon's steady presence, slowly discovering who she could become beyond the boundaries he once shaped. When Little House on the Prairie ended in 1983, Melissa Gilbert stepped into a world that felt both familiar and strangely unsteady. For nearly a decade, the rhythm of her life had been set by early call times, scripts, and the steady presence of a cast and crew who felt like extended family. The silence that followed the final episode carried a weight she had not expected. She was 20 years old, recognized everywhere she went, yet no longer shielded by the structure that had shaped her since she was a child. What came next would test her in ways audiences never saw. She moved into new roles quickly, carving out a path through television films that demanded emotional depth and historical understanding. In The Miracle Worker and The Diary of Anne Frank, she stepped into stories that required a different kind of intensity, grounded not in frontier simplicity, but in real human struggle. These projects allowed her to grow as an actress, and they offered her a way to expand her identity beyond Laura Ingalls Wilder. Each role reminded her that she could carry narratives rooted in history, courage, and resilience. Work, however, did not shield her from the physical challenges that lay ahead. During a Little House musical tour years later, she suffered a broken back, a pain that altered not only her mobility, but her sense of control. Audiences had grown up watching her run across open fields, yet in adulthood she faced a reality that required patience, medical intervention, and the kind of strength that develops far from any spotlight. It marked another shift in her life, one that showed her how quickly the body can change and how deeply she would need to trust her own endurance. Her personal life transformed as well, especially when she made the decision in 2015 to remove breast implants for health reasons. The choice reflected a growing desire to live with more honesty, free from pressures she had felt since childhood. Her career had begun during an era when Hollywood placed enormous emphasis on appearance, but her later years became a process of reclaiming her physical comfort and her sense of self. Removing the implants was more than a medical decision. It was part of a larger movement toward clarity, authenticity, and acceptance. Through all these changes, Melissa continued to step into the public eye when she felt ready. In 2012, she joined Dancing with the Stars, embracing the challenge of performing in an entirely new arena. It was a competitive, demanding environment, yet familiar in its reliance on discipline and performance. The show allowed her to reconnect with audiences who had watched her grow up, and it reminded her that reinvention was still possible, even after decades in the industry. What fans rarely understood was how deeply the legacy of Little House on the Prairie remained present through all these years. Even when she pursued new work, even when her personal life shifted, the shadow of Walnut Grove followed her in both tender and complicated ways. She was proud of the role, grateful for the opportunities it gave her, yet continually learning who she was outside the identity that millions associated with her. Every project, every challenge, every triumph, after the show became part of a larger journey toward defining herself on her own terms. By the time the 50th anniversary of the series approached, Melissa had moved through enough seasons of her own life to understand what that early chapter had given her: strength, discipline, visibility, pressure, and a foundation she could build upon in ways she never could as a child. The world knew her as Half Pint, but now she carried the story of a woman who had lived far beyond the borders of Walnut Grove. As the 50th anniversary of Little House on the Prairie approached, Melissa Gilbert began to speak about the series with a clarity shaped by time, distance, and decades of living beyond the shadow of Laura Ingalls. For years, she had carried the role as both a blessing and a responsibility, yet something shifted as she watched newer generations discover the show. Children who had never seen a frontier drama before now streamed the episodes on modern platforms, and families gathered around televisions much like audiences had in the 1970s. What she once viewed as a childhood job had transformed into a piece of American memory that refused to fade. The realization grew deeper when she started watching the series with her grandchildren. Sitting beside them, she found herself seeing the show in a new light, measuring its emotional weight, not through the lens of a performer, but through the eyes of a grandmother. Scenes she had filmed as a child suddenly carried new meaning. The lessons about community, acceptance, and perseverance resonated differently, revealing the timelessness of the world Landon had built and the innocence she had brought to it. She understood now why audiences returned to the series year after year, searching for something gentle in a world that often felt unsteady. People often assumed Little House on the Prairie was a simple show, a nostalgic retreat into the past. Melissa knew better. The series had quietly mirrored real issues from the 1970s while telling stories set in the 19th century. Racism, addiction, loss, and resilience all found their place in Walnut Grove, woven into plots that felt accessible to viewers of every age. This duality, she realized, was one reason the show endured. It spoke softly, but it carried the truth. And she, as Laura, had been at the center of that conversation without fully understanding its depth at the time. With the approach of the 50th anniversary, Melissa reunited with cast members for interviews and commemorations, reflecting on what their shared experience had become. The long filming days, the laughter between scenes, the sense of family that formed on set, all of it resurfaced with vivid clarity. Yet the celebrations also highlighted how far she had traveled from those early days, how much life had unfolded since she first stepped into Laura's shoes. This distance allowed her to appreciate the legacy with a steady sense of gratitude. She no longer saw the show only as her childhood, she saw it as a cultural touchstone that had shaped countless lives. When Netflix announced a new reboot of Little House on the Prairie in 2025, Melissa welcomed the news with openness. She felt there was room for fresh interpretations, for a new cast to carry the story into another generation. Alice Halsey had been chosen to portray Laura Ingalls this time, and Melissa supported the evolution rather than fearing comparison. She understood that the story belonged not to one person, but to the many families who found comfort, hope, and reflection in its themes. The reboot signaled continuation, not replacement. As she looked back, Melissa recognized the arc of her own journey. A child who learned she had won a role through a schoolyard whisper. A young actress navigating fame while still trying to grow up. An adult discovering strength through injuries and health challenges. And finally, a woman who understood the depth of the legacy she helped shape. What fans never realized was how long it took her to reach this place of perspective. The show had followed her through every chapter of her life, not as a shadow but as a companion. Now, after 50 years, Melissa Gilbert can finally articulate the truth she carried quietly for so long. Little House on the Prairie was never just a role. It was the foundation of a life that unfolded in ways she could not have predicted. A story that continues to grow long after the cameras stopped rolling. 50 years after she first ran across those fields as Laura Ingalls, Melissa Gilbert can finally look at her journey with both honesty and calm. The story that began with a quiet message in a schoolyard grew into a legacy that touched families across generations. She carried the pressures of early fame, the lessons learned under Landon's guidance, the challenges of adulthood, and the long path toward understanding her place beyond Walnut Grove. Through it all, Little House on the Prairie never stopped following her, not as a burden but as a presence that shaped her work, her resilience, and her sense of meaning. Only now does she fully see what the world saw in her all along. The child who brought hope to millions and the woman who continued that story in her own way. For more emotional stories, check out this video.